Hey everybody. Today we're going to basically focus on editing or let me start that over. It's the first live stream, so there's going to be some bumps along the way. Hey everybody, I'm Jesse. Welcome to Shop Talk for Content Creators, where we break down everything you need to know about just making content, whether that's we're just going to share some tips and tricks and educate, maybe do some myth busting. And what makes our perspective a little bit unique is that we've sat on both sides of the table. As content creators ourselves, we know what it's like to build and grow a brand. And as service providers, we understand the business side of the industry. So that means that we can help creators understand the business aspects while showing service providers what clients are actually looking for. Whether you're podcasting, streaming, or making YouTube videos, we're here to share what we've learned along the way. And that's everything from picking the right equipment and recording techniques to editing workflows, marketing strategies, and anything in between. Today I'm joined by Matthew Bliss, who will be one of my regular co-hosts on these streams. Matthew's an all-around great guy that I've gotten to know over the last year or so after crossing paths for years on social media. We've talked about collaborating for a while now, and this live stream seemed like a really good opportunity to do so. Matthew, would you like to tell our viewers a little about yourself and your background with content creation? So bear with us as we do a little more troubleshooting. Let me troubleshoot for a minute. I'll mute what I think is feeding back on your end, and I'll let you talk for a minute. Anything you feel like sharing, go for it, and I will return in a minute.
Okay. I have been thinking about the nature of consciousness and watched something very interesting on YouTube yesterday, actually. It's from Mike Israetel, Dr. Mike Israetel. He's someone who his main job is doing training, like gym training stuff for bodybuilders and people who just want to get stronger gym-wise. We are seeing that has fixed it. So I don't know what you did, but it sounds good. In that case, enjoy this story about how artificial intelligence will not be artificial general intelligence before it becomes artificial super intelligence. So Mike Israetel's case is that he says that basically that currently AI is able to hyper-specialize on topics, but it doesn't have the general idea of consciousness at this stage. But what about artificial general intelligence at the moment, which is the idea that it can generally apply concepts that it's hyper-specialized in previously across any number of tasks, like the ability to take something from image analysis and recognition and turn it into audio, or take applications from what it learns hierarchically from the difference between German Shepherds and Alsatians and apply that to cats instead. That kind of artificial general intelligence is the thing. But, and I heard a little bit of myself there, but we'll proceed. Mike Israetel was saying that superintelligence is more likely to come before, if only because it's going to, well, actually the analogy he used was that you're not going to have a kid in your class who only turns up to classes sometimes, because when he's not in the classroom, he's creating and generating plans for nuclear reactors to be more efficient and create more energy output. You're not going to say that a nuclear physicist level brain is just not good because it's not generally intelligent. the idea is that something like, I don't know, ChatGPT 5 or 5.0 is going to be super intelligent, even if it's not generally intelligent. And I thought that was a very interesting idea. I think the idea that it can super specialize but still not be considered generally intelligent is an interesting comparative case to make. So, yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, however much of me has been heard so far. We're being told in the comments it sounds great now.
And I
No
missed
echo.
enough of what you started with that none of that made any sense. But I'm glad there's something with the mix minus that isn't working right. So again, apologies. We got
Right.
to talk about AI and cats and stuff.
It's okay. This is like a very broad general theory about the potential of artificial intelligence and the way that we should consider it conceptually, which has absolutely zero bearing on what we'll be talking about now, presuming all of this still works.
Well, AI always comes into play, so let's talk about that for a minute. Because
Sure.
content creators were going to be leaning into AI more and more as editors and service providers. Were, if we want to remain competitive on pricing and in services we offer, we're going to have to lean into it. But the thing, I think kind of what you were touching on, AI can do a lot, but we can't rely on it to do everything. It needs a lot of guidance. And it's only the outputs that it creates are only as good as the person directing it. You can't just type in a generic little prompt into ChatGPT and expect it to give you all the answers. It just, you need to learn how to prompt, how to guide it. It's very much like working with a new trainee employee. You're going to have to be very specific about this is what you're going to do, this is how you do it, this is what a good job looks like.
Yeah, it's almost like giving commands to a robot that knows all the things that it needs to know to do the jobs, but you have to be able to command it in a way that does the jobs for you in the way you want it to. And one of the best examples of this actually came from my secondary teaching studies in Australia, where there's an exercise for digital programming that you can get primary school kids to do called the jam sandwich, where a teacher stands at the front of the room with all the bits to create a jam sandwich. You know, you got the jam, you got the bread, you got a knife, you've got a cutting board, and the teacher asks the students to give them instructions in order to create a jam sandwich. And so someone in the class says, take the bread out of the bag. And okay, take the bread out of the bag. And they dump out the entire loaf onto the cutting board. And then someone else says, grab the bread and put the jam on it. And so they take the entire loaf of bread in a big pile and put the jar of jam on top. You know, those are very non-specific instructions. And while in programming terms, it makes sense that you have to be logically specific with what you give stuff, that's what you're describing AI as at the moment. You have to be very direct, very specific about what you want, understanding that it's predictive, so it's not going to remember when you tell it not to do a thing. Yeah, that's the stage that it's at the moment. Definitely not what I was talking about 10 minutes ago.
Probably not, but AI, we can transition to different areas of it. But yeah, that's where a lot of my focus has been the last few months as we kind of pivot away from production work and looking for more ways we can offer better solutions to clients who have bigger problems to solve. Because, and this is going to kind of tie in with some of the things we talk about later with like pricing and podcast editing, AI is coming in and it's really disrupting the industry. You have a lot of people now jumping into offering podcast editing services because we have text-based editing like Descript, Riverside. There's a bunch of them now, and it makes it easier for people to offer these services who never could have in the past because it was more of a specialized service. And with AI, it's now becoming more and more commoditized because we're getting more competition from more people at all skill levels. Not that that's a bad thing, but for those of us who rely on it to make our entire living, it makes it a lot tougher. So I'm having to find ways to, or look at how I'm making my money and realizing there's a lot of downward pressure on podcast editing rates, despite what other people in the industry want us to believe. The people paying $225 an episode, there's not a lot of them, and I think give it another year or two, and we're going to start seeing more people up top, at the top of the industry, like the bigger shows who are paying independent contractors, not the ones going to agencies who are paying $10,000 an episode, but people hiring people like you and I. They're going to start looking at it as, well, there's a ton of editors out there on Upwork who can charge anywhere from $50 to $150 an episode. Why should I keep paying $225 or more? So that's where we've spent kind of the end of last year really analyzing what we're doing and just trying to figure out a new direction. And it's kind of across the board with creative work in general. Upwork and Fiverr have completely tanked the perceived value of creative work. And since that's what most of our services were based around, we are really having to pivot and look at better ways of running our business.
Yeah. And it should be made clear here too, maybe for those who don't know us and our relationship too well, I don't work for Tansy Astor Academy. I do my own podcast editing stuff, and you guys do your own things, so we don't share clients or anything like that.
And
But yeah,
kind of along those lines, when I say we, I'm talking about my wife, Tara, and I, not Matthew, like he said. We don't have a business relationship. He does his own thing. I do my thing with Tara. So go on.
This is purely a meeting of the minds. But yeah, no, you're absolutely spot on. And it's such a really interesting puzzle that a lot of people don't see because I think there's still a lot of focus on the entry of both podcasters and podcast editors into being able to do what they do. And the people that separate themselves, like you and I, are the ones who specialize and seek to hyper-focus on things to improve and offer an even better service over time. So there are, and this isn't disparaging people who choose to do things this way, but there are people who learn just enough from Descript, just enough from Riverside, just enough from Podcastle, something like that, that offer enough to edit episodes. They edit the episodes and they sell them, and that's it. There's nothing more to that. But for me, I know what separates me in this market, and being able to charge a little bit more than what would otherwise be fairly basic pricing, competing with people that can offer stuff like $30 an episode on Upwork, is the focus on attention, the ability to adapt, to change requirements based on client needs, to work with customer analytics, to make recommendations and strategy based on the performance of the episodes. All of this stuff together makes a more complete, more improved workflow. I don't even know what the right word to call it, but in terms of being like a professional editor, a professional podcast services provider, all of that is super important. The professional learning stage, all of it. And AI just fits neatly into that. You kind of have to work in to find out not just offering more, but what it does good for you. And like what you said there, like already I want to ask you what the most beneficial thing that you've been doing with AI at the moment is, and how you do that effectively to either save yourself time or improve what you offer the clients, whether that be faster with a quicker turnaround, or the quality that you could offer them that might change. Like all of it, that I guess my main point that I'm trying to get at there is that if someone is watching this right now, listening to this right now, and they're going, stop having a crack at me because I'm just getting started and AI is the way that I do this. Why is this bad? That it's not bad, but you should always seek to continuously improve to get to a level where you can offer something that's a little bit more, and that's where the money will be. But anyway, all that is to say that my big question for you, Jesse, is what's the AI thing that you've been doing at the moment? Maybe the prompting, something like that to you delivers the most value at the moment.
Well, I want to touch on one thing you were just saying, that
Sure.
yeah, everybody starts somewhere. Using AI, there's nothing wrong with that. But the thing is, if you rely on AI to do everything because you don't have the skill to do it yourself, the best you can ever do is what the AI does. To be able to do something that is better than what Descript can do on its own, you have to understand, what does a bad edit sound like? How do you go and correct a bad edit? How do you improve your decision making? Because Descript is not good. It can't make decisions. You tell it to cut out all of your filler words, and then you have all of these bad cuts. That's why I don't use Descript for that purpose, because I spend more time trying to fix all of the bad edits than it would take for me to edit everything manually. So yeah, the big thing is to just continue learning. And that experience is what clients pay for, our abilities to be able to figure out how to solve their problems, because they have more problems than just needing somebody to edit their podcast. Sometimes they have bad audio and AI tools aren't going to fix it. So it's just a matter of continuing to learn. Neither one of us are against AI or trying to shame anybody who wants to lean into it to become a podcast editor. So let's see, we've got a question here. Why not choose a person you know has potential to succeed in what they do and create something for them for free? And yeah, I agree with Matthew. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I think I have an idea what you might be going for, but I'm not 100% certain.
Yeah, for me, I'd read it as potentially investing in a podcast that will be successful, and perhaps agreeing to a revenue share once they start getting massive amounts of sponsorships or something like that. You know, offering your services for 10% of what they make across the lifetime of their podcast. Is that the impression you get?
That is, and one, I've had people pitch that to me, and podcasts in general are kind of unknowns. If you have someone who has a following, someone who is a sure thing, or as sure of a thing as possible, that they're going to get that funding pretty quickly, and it's going to be enough to pay you for your time, that's one thing. But I've had clients I've worked with in the past, or people who I've talked to about doing production who, well, I don't have much money, so can you do this for free or really cheap, and then we'll cut you in on the profits once they start coming in. Ad revenue for podcasts generally doesn't pay that much. So you could really end up doing a lot of work and get no pay out of it. And a common thing you'll hear is, but you'll get exposure. If nobody listens to the podcast, you're not getting exposure. If they aren't podcasters themselves, that exposure is of no value to you. And if they are people who aren't your ideal clients, again, no value to you. So you're giving up a ton of time and providing a ton of value to that person, but you're not getting any value in return.
Yeah, and the exposure thing has mystified me for a little while because, like, great, you're exposed to the person who's giving you the files in order to edit the episode, and you edit it and it gets released, and maybe they chuck your name in the show notes. But if you're doing a great job, the podcast editor is invisible. Like, you don't know it's edited. It depends on the nature of the podcast, of course. If it's an audio drama, then naturally it has to be, and someone should be applauded for soundscaping whatever they did. But if it's just an interview episode, then you want to make it sound as natural as possible. And then the listener, who is your potential client, isn't saying to themselves, oh man, that conversation, that was edited together real great. No, it's when you hear the podcast really well, you think, oh, that was a great conversation. The host did a fantastic job. I'm going to subscribe to the podcast. And then, maybe they have a Patreon that you join, or, you skip the ad that somehow sponsored the episode. But I think the production sits very much in the background, unless you're exposed to a Joe Rogan that has his producer doing stuff and contributing content during the episodes. And I picked Joe Rogan just because he has a massive exposure and people will kind of understand what I mean when I say that. Generally, the editor doesn't get that kind of exposure. So that's always mystified me a little bit. Yeah.
We've got another question. Let me see if I can raise these up somehow. Let's just do this. Well, that's not...
What are we looking at?
There we go. The learning process. So we'll go back to what we had. Sorry,
guys. If you want to blame someone, it's all Jesse. I'm not doing anything.
It's me. This is like I said at the beginning. In case you missed it, this is our first live stream, and some stuff like the comments, it's a little tough to test out without being live. So.
This is where the personalities come out. This is where you learn about us.
It's a learning process, and bear with us. I will read. After the show movie podcast asked or commented, I actually learned how to edit via YouTube videos. Been doing it for over 10 years, and I'm still learning. Yeah, editing we're always learning. Whether we're figuring out new ways of editing, new kind of building up our thought process so we can make decisions quicker. And that's a question I see a lot, is how can I get faster at editing? Your decision making is probably the biggest thing that slows you down. Being able to make those decisions on the fly, okay, that's not worth editing out. So instead of stopping, trying to make an edit, you just play it through and you don't even pause. That decision making is probably one of the things that has sped up my efficiency more than anything else.
Yep, same here. And I try to categorize it as, I'm going to butcher the name, I think it's Daniel Kahneman, talks about system 1 and system 2 thinking, where system 1 is the quick reaction stuff and system 2 is where you slow down and make a very deliberate decision. And I want to move as much of the decision making that I do into that system 1 thinking so that it just happens. Like, you don't have to think about it. And something that I keep at the top of my brain whenever I'm editing is that for every second I spend on what might be a minute cut, that compounds constantly to the point where, in the general parlance, people throw around, like, if it's an hour-long episode, it will generally take 2 to 3 hours to edit. That's because for every second you may stop to fix a thing that takes 2 seconds to fix, and that compounds over that time. So the more you can do, that's just a quick reaction, the better you're going to be. But I love hearing that they're still learning, like they haven't hit the peak. There is always something you can do better. There is always something new that someone can discover. For example, something that I thought was a massive problem for video podcast editing for me was being able to balance the audio and get the loudness high enough to just make an export out of DaVinci Resolve and turn that into something that can be uploaded and is the right loudness. As it turns out, in a recent iteration of DaVinci Resolve, there was an optimize loudness option available on delivery, which meant that I can pick the standards that I usually use in Adobe Audition. So that was huge for me. That means I'm not wasting time like moving sliders and dials up and down. I can just get the relative loudness right in the video edit and then optimize at the end to make sure the loudness is the right level. And that seems very basic, but there's always something that you're missing that can, shave down 5 minutes down to 1 second, which compounded across all of the episodes you edit in your lifetime just saves you a ton of time. There is always stuff to learn. So thanks for pointing that out after the movie show podcast. I'm always going to get those mixed up, I think.
So we've got another comment. I can literally edit my podcast in 45 minutes. I'm like a robot at this point, and that's where we all end up when we do this long enough. We get faster as we do it. We build more efficient workflows and find better ways, faster ways of doing things. Kind of like what Matthew was talking about with DaVinci's new deliver loudness, or whatever it was called, the loudness normalization. I've leaned really heavily on plugins like DX Revive Pro, or Supertone Clear, Sonable Smart plugins to really speed up my mixing workflow. What used to take me probably 15 to 20 minutes per track, taking the recording, going into RX, cleaning it up, exporting it, bringing it into the DAW, mixing it. Usually I can get it done in probably 3 to 4 minutes per track. So going from 15 to 20 minutes, if it's a bad piece of audio, down to 3 or 4 for a 2-track episode, that's what, let's say 40 minutes before and down to probably 5 or 6 minutes after. So technology is making it easier to do things, and I didn't think this would be possible. The technology would make it so anybody can clean up audio. It used to be cleaning up audio was a very specialized skill. Anybody who's opened up RX knows it's powerful, but it's very intimidating. It takes time to learn how to use it. It also takes time. But you've got plugins like DX Revive Pro, which can knock out a lot of that stuff in just one twist of a knob.
Yep. That's like DX Revive Pro is something like a cheat code that I know how people aren't talking about it as much as we probably would, because at the pro level where you get access to all of the algorithmic applications of processing that it has, you have to pay, I think it's like $300, $400 to get access to it for life. $299. Okay. We've got to be in freedom units, I guess, on this podcast at the moment. I'm not going to pretend I know what the comparison between the euro is for me, but I know it's starting to creep up to you guys, which euro was a bit more powerful previously. But anyway, it is an incredibly powerful tool. And yeah, that it's, I don't want to use the word democratize, but it means that you need to know less about how to improve the audio and more just about listening to it, knowing what sounds good and what is applied well to improve the listener experience. That's just, it's amazing what it can do. But as a caveat to that, I think the reason that we both can use it effectively in the way it's intended is because we've got the experience of doing it the manual way. Like, we were tilling fields with, scythes and handheld things until we started to get cows to pull multiple plows through an entire field, and all of a sudden we can get it done in 5 times the time. And then someone gave us a tractor, which is the DX Revive Pro, that can just do an entire field in about 10 minutes. That kind of stuff you appreciate when you come to it from having to do it the old way. And we've got the experience of that practice doing it manually too. Like, we've got our ears trained for it. This is the part where I admit that I don't have a very strong audio background like you, Jesse, having come from music. But that practice and that time in the mines really helps you hone your craft and be able to hear what these tools do really well. And that's a thing that I think people don't value it as much as they probably should. Like, the common complaint will be, going back to AI, reduced to an objection to AI generally, instead of valuing the tool for what it does. Like equivocating a DX Revive Pro with Adobe Enhance V2. Those are 2 completely different tools that work in different ways and offer different things. But you have to have the experience to do it. So getting practice with these things is the biggest thing. And of course, the postscript there, that if you've got the money, or you can justify paying now and use it across episodes that you'll be editing for other people, and justify that cost over the next 6 months, buy DX Revive Pro now. There's a reason that it won a Grammy, because it is just an unreal tool. And also, not to completely take over the conversation, but as a side note, I went to a music gig with my wife and some of her friends to see Christy Moore, a old Irish folk singer from back in the day. It was a great show, and I recorded some of the songs on my phone for posterity because my wife's father wasn't able to come, my father-in-law. Now, I took those tracks back, and I was next to a bathroom door with people walking past me. I was towards the middle back of the theater, very close to a speaker. I took the phone recording and did a bit of DX Revive Pro, like maybe 10% on Natural 2 for those who are aware of the algorithms available, 8 to 10%, and just like a tiny bit of noise reduction, a little bit of compression to bring up the stuff that's a bit soft, and it improved the music recording so much. Like, it's so powerful in how it can just bring the singer, in this case, just a little bit closer to you, as if you're right there in front of him instead of beside a speaker. It's so powerful. We're not sponsored yet, but maybe if anyone from Accentize is watching, that'd be great.
Yeah. I've got another comment. When you look at other people's content, you often see many mistakes in their editing. You can pick someone and help them. It's still early in the morning for me here. I can't read yet. You can pick someone and help them with advice, or even create something for them. People never forget those who help them at the beginning of their journey. And this ties into one of the questions we were going to address. And yeah, I'm a big advocate for helping people out. But one thing I would say is, I don't look at it as mistakes in editing so much as there's different styles of editing. Just because something's done in a way that I wouldn't do myself, everybody's learning, and some styles are more kind of abrasive or in your face. And unfortunately, because so many people are using Descript, and I don't like blaming Descript on this, but they kind of are responsible for this. People are getting more used to listening to audio with a bunch of bad edits. It's becoming more normalized these days. We've
Mm.
been conditioned on watching all sorts of TikToks and reels and all of that, where people have to chop everything up to get it to fit into the time limit of the platform. So so many people are so conditioned to listening to poorly edited audio. Really think a lot of people don't care that much anymore. Are people
Mm.
really going to stop listening to a podcast or stop watching a video if it, like with a video, if it has a bunch of jump cuts? I don't know. Maybe they will. I'm sure there are some people that will. There's a bunch of people that won't. With a podcast, I mean, if the content is good, people aren't going to turn it off because you hear some choppy editing here and there. They just aren't.
No. And I think there's a bigger question here too. Um, the answer is the same with what you said there, that every editing style is different and that the audience comes to expect different types of things from a podcast at the end. And the end always has to be the goal, right? Like whether the discussion is about what a podcast is or it isn't, what someone should do as opposed to what they actually do, all these things within the industry or the process before it gets to the audience, almost all of it doesn't matter insofar as it doesn't impact the end result that the listener gets. Back to the problem of the editor being invisible that I mentioned before. But one of the biggest things that kind of irritates me just a little bit is the professionalism that we need in our industry. Speaking to that, that when you hear something that you don't like as an editor or that you would do yourself, I'm never going to tell another editor to say, yeah, send that podcaster an email and ask for the contact details of that editor and send them to you so that you can get in touch and say, hey, buddy, sounds like you're at the start of your journey. There's a couple of things that I can tell you that you got wrong in this episode that I can help you fix up in future episodes. Don't worry, buddy, I've got you. That's a very direct way of saying, I didn't like what I heard. I can do better. I'm going to tell you how you can do it better, like me. And to some people, that's great. I mean, if you're just getting started and you can say, yeah, I edit for Diary of a CEO, I edit for Joe Rogan. Here's a few things that you can look at. That's like, whoa, like one of the big wigs has come down and told me how I can actually up my game really fast. But you don't know. The podcast editor is generally invisible, which means that you could be objecting to something the podcaster did. They might be editing it themselves. You might be criticizing someone who's been in the industry for 15 years and they've got a honed, refined craft and almost like a sonic branding that they add to their editing. That is what it was intended to be. It wasn't a mistake. Breaths are the biggest one, I think. If you hear breaths, someone's made an error. They didn't press the right button. And so all the breaths are still in it. And that's a big problem. That's usually when the jump cuts come in, like you can hear cut. But yeah, the professionalism, like we need to have some level of respect for the other editors that are in our field. We need to make sure that we're respecting what they've done, what they've chosen as part of their editing, and also that the client can make requests of editors to make specific changes too. Like there's a whole big professional component, professional respect component to approaching people and helping them get better at what they do. I don't have the answer for that, by the way. Like we are all kind of obscured, which is why I was really glad, like Jesse, when we met, the ability to network and create relationships in what is essentially a very obscured kind of career from the rest of the world outside of the podcast production is really hard. And that's why getting into groups like Facebook groups and stuff for editors is a really good idea sometimes. But yeah, just I guess The only thing I can say there is, make sure that you're being respectful when you approach these editors to try and give them a leg up. If you don't offer a course like Tansy Astor Academy to improve editing skills, and you don't teach something, I don't know where I'm going. Save me, Jesse. What am I saying?
I'll jump in. What the way I see it is, if I were to approach someone else to try to mentor them, for a lot of people that can come off almost like a cold call. You don't know me. I'm coming in. I'm trying to sell you on something. That's how a lot of people might take it, even if you're genuinely trying to help them. If I approach someone, say, and tell them, hey, I hear some issues in your editing, I can help you fix them, a lot of people are instantly going to say, okay, what are they trying to sell me and how much is it going to cost? Not saying that that's always the case, but generally that's how we've been kind of conditioned when somebody reaches out to us that we don't know out of the blue. I think the better approach is, I'm all for mentoring, but the person has to be open to receiving that kind of feedback. And I know from my community, a lot of people are hesitant to put their work up there to get feedback because I wish I knew the reasons why. I can only guess. But I think part of it is people get intimidated putting their work out there for someone else to kind of critique. But we do that when we put our audio out there for our clients or for ourselves. And kind of to the point you were making about what we hear on the podcast is not always reflective of the editor's skills. There are so many clients who, I need this cut out, but we can't cut this out cleanly. I don't care. It needs to come out. Okay, I'm just going to chop it out. It's not my place to fight you. It's your show. If you want that out, I can tell you it's not going to sound good, but I'm only going to tell you a few times, and if you don't care, I'm just going to stop speaking up about it and just chop it up and leave it in there however it sounds.
Yeah. And someone, I can't remember where I saw it. I tend to get across a lot of YouTube, but someone described offering services to a client where you are offering services. You are not an artist, in the sense that they're not paying you to edit episodes like Jesse McCune. They are paying you for your skills to realize their vision. And so whatever they have, that's what's going to come out, because you are going to help realize that vision. And that was another component that I forgot to mention, that you don't know what the original position was. And this is where DX Revive Pro is just excellent for me, because there are some clients I have which have brilliant conversations. Some of them have been historically recorded on Zoom, which, in like a vacuum in podcasting, huge no-no. Like, we don't like Zoom at all. We prefer anything else, just because of the processing it does and the way it doesn't separate content right, and 720p for all audio, for all video or whatever. But DX Revive Pro for an audio-only show allows me to kind of hide and improve that audio artificially and give it a bit more bounce. But someone who's an editor might still listen to the podcast without that context and go, that sounds bad. That sounds like badly processed, great Riverside recordings, as opposed to really well processed or improved Zoom recordings. Like, you just don't know where it's coming from. So coming in without any preconceptions about what the production process has been like for every podcast is important as well. It's a tough one. I can't help but think about how insulated we are in the production process. Like, we are very much in there, in the middle, doing the stuff. Like, stuff comes in, we do something, and then send something back out again. And as much as the podcaster has to represent that final product that we make, we also don't technically observe any of the criticism either sometimes. Like, there will be criticism we see on a podcast that we say, okay, yeah, I did miss that one breath, and there was that one time where actually happened. Adobe Audition doesn't process H.265 video from DaVinci Resolve properly and cuts the audio and restarts it again halfway through, so the episode sounds all jumbled and is broken. Yep, that's on me. But we're kind of doing it for clients. We're insulated from some of that criticism as well. So we take our obscurity and are able to hide behind our clients in that sense a little bit. And that might lead to some of the modesty too. Like, generally we're protected and don't have to hear critical feedback from people who understand our craft. It's very few people who, like in a situation where we both had podcasts and Jesse, you were like, hey, I'll edit your show and you edit my show, and we'll, completely get rid of the cognitive biases associated with editing our own voices and faces. It's very rare that something like that comes about as an arrangement. So yeah, it's just, can't help but think how safe we feel in the production processes with our clients. It's
And you touched on a really big point that I try to teach people. And for some reason, podcast editing is one of those areas where people haven't figured this out. But if you do graphic design for a client, if you build websites for a client, you learn really quickly to separate yourself from the work. That you are being paid to provide a service, and that service is to create what the client wants. Doesn't matter if it looks good, if it sounds good, as long as it meets what they're looking for, you've done your job. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle. I'm guessing most podcast editors got into it after editing their own podcast. So they apply that same work ethic that you do with your own show. You want your own show to sound as good as possible. That's built bad habits for you as you transition into a service provider, because you take that same work ethic and you think that by putting all of this extra effort into the client's work, that it's going to somehow reflect better on you than if you just deliver what they're looking for. People will oftentimes spend, I don't know, probably, I think I saw someone say they'll spend 10 to 15 minutes trying to piece together a word because somebody mispronounced it.
Yep.
No one is going to, if it's worth putting in that much effort, the client can easily just re-record that word. It's going to take far less time for everybody involved. But the reality is, no one's going to stop listening to that episode because there was that imperfection. They mispronounced a word. The pause was a little bit too long. The sentence wasn't grammatically correct. And I'm not going to get started on that, but that's a whole other thing that working with clients who use transcripts, they think you can just cut and paste like a text document to fix grammatical errors. And most of the time, they're not going to fit quite right. And again, that goes into, we don't know what the client instructed the editor to do.
Yeah.
But I did want to first ask you what your time is like, because I know we've done an hour. I don't want to keep you longer than you have availability.
Well, look, we can roll on for another 15 minutes. I think we had some troubleshooting time there. We should give people the value back since they came at the beginning.
Okay, so I wanted to touch on your AI question from probably 40 minutes ago. What I've been working on is basically familiarizing myself with how to get better at prompting and looking into ways of going deeper and implementing like workflows, and especially when it comes to clients who create content. I'm working on figuring out how to build basically a knowledge base of all of your content so that you can repurpose it in your own voice for whatever you need, whether it's newsletters or creating social media content. But there's a lot of power in AI to do a lot of things like that. And
that is pretty unreal. So you're essentially creating personalized GPTs for your clients so that they can generate, I presume, just transcribed content, but are we talking about actual, audiograms and stuff like that as well?
I'm still figuring that all out.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
it goes well beyond kind of a custom GPT type thing where you can train it a little bit. We're going much further in building an entire repository of like everything you've created. Or since we do a lot of work with companies, they have huge libraries of content they've created. But we need to be able to put it somewhere where they can start interacting with it and using something like ChatGPT or an LLM to go into that database and pull information to get new ideas, to repurpose that content into new ways.
So in that case, is what you're creating closer to like a multi-prompt LLM agnostic kind of chain that they can use at their leisure that contains all the information? Like, is it a database? And tell me if this is too in the weeds here, because I'm very interested with what you're doing here. Because most people would say, oh, you'll have to API OpenAI's LLM for $12,000 a month or whatever, and write your own prompts that go on top of the stored database of material that gets processed through server-based interactions and is refreshed on a regular basis. Meanwhile, you'll have to create your own front-end interface to interact with the content and have memory retention, pay for token management and repetition across time for however long the client will want to use it. Like, there is a lot of stuff here that a lot of expensive, potentially moving parts. So I would just be very interested to know what the MVP product that you want to deliver to a client is. And that might be a moot point because it's too super secret, hush hush at this stage until you offer it. And because we don't want to, reveal some industry secrets here that you might want to keep for yourself. But yeah, I'm just very curious.
Basically, you got it. You upload everything, you've got to format it. There's a lot of technicalities, but basically you put all of your content into a database, and then you can connect an LLM. You can choose what one you want to use to access it and interact with. You can do ChatGPT, you can do open source stuff that's self-hosted. There's a ton of different ways you can go about it depending on your needs and what's going to give you the best results. So we're building it to be kind of flexible depending on the needs of the client.
That is really cool. Man, that's Tansy Asta setting the standard for the industry there.
Yeah.
I'm sure you learned about it from someone else, but still, the diligent people watching the stream right now, I hope they take that away as looking a couple of miles down the road instead of just 100 meters in front of you. And yes, I am aware I just, mixed metric and imperial, but we'll move on there. Looking miles down the road and looking to create a very specific, very curated offering for your clients that makes it an experience that kind of locks them in as well. It's a really interesting way to do it because presumably they've paid for the database, but once they move on from you, like they have to do something with it. They have to find a way to use that information in the same way that you were creating for them as a service. So it's a great way to lock them in with what would otherwise be an excellent service anyway. I just that just mystifies me. I don't think I'd be able to do that myself, but you know, if you're looking for resumes, let me know.
But I mean, that's the thing. The AI can do so much, and people seem to just go into the basics. I look at something like CastMagic. I tried it out, and I was really disappointed in it. The outputs, and what everybody watching this, if you use CastMagic, what you need to know, most of these more customized AI type apps, all they are fancy front ends for ChatGPT. They use API, they're just sending basic prompts because, let's face it, to get something usable to the masses, you have to use very generic prompts. By using something like CastMagic, you lose a lot of the flexibility, and for the same price, you could pay for a subscription to ChatGPT and get, 80% of the same stuff. Maybe you can't get it to create the video shorts, but you can ask it to, you can give it the transcript with all of the timestamps and have it pull all of the relevant things, give you the timestamps, and you can go in and make those edits yourself really quickly. So I don't know why people would pay for CastMagic when you have so much more flexibility and power by doing it all yourself within ChatGPT. So basically, you're paying for a collection of generic prompts that are built to apply to the masses. And you're paying them to save yourself a little bit of time of learning how to prompt better yourself. And if you work with multiple clients who have different voices, different types of show notes they want, having that flexibility really becomes valuable.
It does, and they obscure so much. This will definitely be a subject for another live stream that we could go into in further depth. But the almost as a red flag should be if they sell it and it seems to be incredibly easy for you to do something incredibly hard, there is something in the middle that is going to affect the output that you get. And CastMagic is the perfect epitomization of that. Like, I got half off code a year ago. I'm coming up to renewal on CastMagic in March 2022. It has so much in it, but I used it because at the time it had the best transcription option. And it would take longer than 20-minute files, where ChatGPT at the time I think only took like up to 20 minutes. It just doesn't do that stuff well enough. And good transcription alone isn't worth the $400 or whatever a month it is. It's just, yeah. Any AI service has that issue that you mentioned, unless you can get in there and do some of the stuff yourself, like build the profile, do the prompting in order for you to get at the result that you're looking for, and know that there isn't anything on top that's causing issues. The immediate example that comes to mind is Samsung phones compared to Google phones. Clean Android operating system, nothing on top extra except for whatever Google likes to push at you, but generally you've got it anyway. But Samsung phones, you get all the Google stuff, and then you get all the Samsung stuff, which you just can't remove, bothers you about updates that you don't want, keeps asking you to agree to terms and conditions that you choose to ignore every single time. It's bloat. That bloat affects your experience, affects the output. And at the end of it, it's a great marketing strategy. It's a great sale of a product. but what they're actually selling when it's dependent on a service like ChatGPT, which offers something individually by itself, just it's not worth it. Going through the effort to learn how to do it yourself. They should follow in your footsteps on that front, I think.
And for the podcasters out there listening who outsource your editing, one thing that I'm taking a couple of AI courses to help learn all of the nuts and bolts to do the stuff I've been talking about. But one of them, the guy said, to be a consultant, all you have to do is be one step ahead of the client. I don't really agree with that, but for a lot of podcast editors, that can be the case. So be aware that if your podcast editor is charging you an additional fee to do show notes, chances are they're just uploading your stuff into CastMagic and having it write show notes for you. They're probably not sitting there writing them out from scratch. So be aware that there are options for you to be able to do some of this stuff yourself and save yourself some money. I know podcast editors out there are like, no, don't tell them that, but that's the reality. I don't like seeing people upcharge for something that doesn't cost anything for them to do, really. Because if I'm editing for 15 clients, the $20 a month or however much CastMagic costs, that's built into my pricing. I'm spending maybe 15 minutes uploading and cleaning up the result. But you can do that yourself for the same amount and save yourself whatever they're upcharging you each episode each month.
Yeah. And I think a simple feedback question would be the way to test that, right? Like we're presuming on the podcast editor here some level of nefariousness. And if you come back and say, these show notes look like they were just popped out of ChatGPT. I can see delve, I can see dive deeper, I can see whatever other words that I can never think of because they're so numerous in there. It's not finishing a sentence with why they should listen, but instead talking about how resilient the guest was. Can you like human it up a little bit? Can you like add a bit of, flair? Here's our customer profile. Here's our ideal client. Try and incorporate the message here into what the show notes should include to best entice our ideal audience member. And if the editor comes back and says, no, I can't do that. Sorry, this is what you get. Then that would be the red flag immediately. Or they try and it comes out with the same stuff every time. Or they say, I tried, but it wouldn't let me do it. It wouldn't let me use the profile. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Well, and it goes back to what we were talking about how we're getting more conditioned to hear bad edits on audio and video. A lot of ChatGPT, its writing is based on traditional marketing copy. So we've been reading marketing copy for so long. If you don't play around with ChatGPT enough, you might not pick up on these overused cliche LLM terms. Like if you use Gemini, they have their own specific terms you see used over and over. Like I think dive in. Mm-hmm. So the more you use these tools, the more you start to see just how generic some of the copy is. And you start to see, oh, that looks like it was written by ChatGPT. And if we can start seeing that, your listeners can start seeing it, most of them aren't going to care because how many people actually look at show notes? But are you paying... Yeah. What's your return on your investment for paying the editor to do it versus doing it yourself? Only you can make that call.
And a thought that I'd like us to finish on is something that I've considered in myself quite a lot because I'm the person who goes in, takes the AI generated output for show notes and paints my brush over it. Like I will just chop out all the words that need to go that look all AI-y, change the tone to whatever the podcast host's voice is like, do all the things to make it look good. But what I worry about sometimes is that now that we've been taught to recognize when these things come up, that perhaps in our general writing, like from raw, that has come out of our brains, is starting to get some of that language in it. Like we're starting to passively absorb what AI content is being thrown about, and it's starting to get integrated in our writing in a way that we may not even realize. Like I don't know how good I sound on this stream, but I did a bit of voice work for one of my clients, reading out tax conditions for the ACCA tax exam for students in Ireland. And a couple of them came back and said, no, that's AI generated. That's an AI generated voice. You shouldn't have used that. And I was like, no, bro, I did the whole thing myself. What are you talking about? So not only are people's heckles up about pointing things out being AI, I'm sometimes a bit worried that we start creating AI recognized content by accident. Is this something that you worry about?
Honestly, I don't, because all I care about is that it meets my standard. I think that people strive too much for perfection sometimes, and at least in terms of marketing, people have been pushing away from perfection, like that really polished, produced type of marketing. That's why you see so much more raw content being used to market stuff. And that's why you're seeing just a lot of pushback on like your voiceover. They listened to it and probably found it to be too perfect. If you're recording in a good sounding space, you've edited everything down, they're not going to understand the nuances that separate an AI voice from a real voice. And I know there was, like last week, Sesame came out, the AI that you can talk to. Everybody's going nuts over it. And okay, it has language right. It understands a little more about the pausing and dynamics of, or not the dynamics, but the spacing between words, that when we talk, we don't talk in a really steady cadence. So it puts some spaces in there, but it still sounds completely artificial to me. But that's because I spend so much of my time listening to dialogue. Not hearing it, but listening to it, because I edit it for a living. So these things jump out. But you read these comments, so many people for a while couldn't tell the difference between the AI voice and the real person. So, yeah, those lines are going to be blurred, and I don't really put a whole lot of thought into it, at least with writing. Tara is a writer, so she's like, no, that's not good, that's not good. She's chopping everything up to make it what she likes, and that's the thing. AI is just a tool. If we rely on it 100% of the time to do what we can't do ourselves, we're reliant on, well, like I said at the beginning, we'll only be as good as the AI, whatever it can produce. The best results are going to come from using both, because AI is good for research. It's good for ideation. It's good for refining what you've got and giving you feedback. But if you just ask it, write me an article about podcast editing, you're not going to like the results because it's going to be generic. You need to inject some of yourself, some of your own instruction into AI and guide it to getting at least something usable that you can go through and finish up. And that's a whole lot better than starting from a blank page. You'll get a stronger article because you're not reliant only on your own thinking. You have an editor, a coach you can work with.
Yep. And AI is not going to tell you, hey, I need more information, buddy, or sorry, I'm on a break.
If you ask it to, it will ask you if it doesn't have enough information. But if you don't prompt it to ask you, it'll just move forward without asking, just assuming it knows what you want.
Yeah. It is too agreeable and needs to be told. So presuming emergence isn't something we can do just yet. But that's a great note to end on, I think.
I agree.
Really big, I guess not a bombshell, but something to think about until we come back next week for another round of, was it Shop Talk that you called it?
Shop Talk for
Shop
content
Talk.
creators.
There you go. Do we have a sign-off?
No, not really. But
well,
we'll see you next week. Thanks for watching. Hopefully we
Like
can
and
get to
subscribe.
some of the questions we'd planned on answering today.
Listen, they'll all apply across time. So if you want to
They will.
hear the stuff that we didn't tell you about, that we are going to talk about, come next week.
I agree. Great sign off. See you next week.